Hello and welcome to the Everyday Adventure Podcast. My name is Nicki Bass and I will be bringing you thoughts, ideas and stories from some incredible guests to hopefully inspire you to live more adventurously in your everyday lives. So today I am incredibly excited to welcome Kitty Dimbleby to the show. So Kitty is a writer, an author and a poet who I came across on Instagram, and I immediately fell in love with her feed. She does the most amazing poems, but also her pictures of her everyday adventures, whether it's wild swimming, out on the paddleboard. And as more than that, the stories behind about how that has helped her so much in terms of her physical and psychological well-being as well. So I was incredibly delighted when Kitty agreed to come on and be a guest on the show. And it's taken a little bit of time, but we finally managed to connect, which is just brilliant. So I couldn't be more thrilled to have her here today. Kitty, thank you so much for agreeing to join me.
Oh, thank you so much for inviting me too. I'm really, really pleased and proud to have been asked.
Oh, no, it's lovely to have you here. And so I guess my first question has to be with in mind that, all those gorgeous photos you have of wild swimming. And I know, often the stories right behind them. So, I mean, have you always done outdoor adventurous sort of activities, or was there something specific that sort of motivated you to take up wild swimming in particular?
I've always loved swimming, and my parents used to call me the little fish when I was younger, and I would always go in any body of water, but then had very much lost that until about 2 years ago. So just before COVID, February before COVID, my godson was very ill and having a serious operation. And I also went to visit my grandfather, who was in an old people's home and was coming towards the end. And the old people's home was in Devon, and I just got this overwhelming urge to go and jump in the sea and scream at the universe, is the way I put it. And I was luckily with a like-minded friend who happened to have a swimming costume in her car. So we drove to the beach and I ran into the sea with the kids and the dog looking at me like I was nuts. And I screamed at the universe. And my godson came through his operation and is doing really well. My grandfather has now sadly passed away, but it was just this moment of I craved it. And then I made a plan, because I had just turned 40, that I was going to swim all over the world in my 40th year or my 41st year, whatever it is, the first year after being 40. And we had lots of trips planned because I'd just turned 40. And then, of course, COVID happened. And I went in the paddling pool in the back garden.
It's almost the same. I mean,
the same. But then when things eased up, I just started swimming in the river in Devon, where I used to go as a child, and then just kept going, and then realized it was September and October and I still wanted to go in the river near Bath. Carried on through the winter, going a few times a week. And then when we locked down again in January, and every parent will remember the utter horror of the fact you'd laid out your children's school uniform and at 8 p.m. he said, "We're not opening the schools." Even thinking about it now makes me feel tearful and anxious. But I went to the lake, and I have access very luckily to this private lake, and I went there with my sister-in-law, and we would meet there for our allowed exercise, breaking the ice. And something about it made me cope with those dark winter months of lockdown. It was the physical, the forced being in your body rather than being in your mind and being worried, because when you go into really icy cold water, everything is about how you breathe and you focus. You have to be in the now. And for someone who spends their life worrying or not being in the now, it's very good for me.
Gosh, that sounds amazing. I was just thinking I could have done with some ice, I think, back in that. Cast me back as well. I actually took my children to school 2 days early by mistake and wondered where the bus was. That's how desperate I was. So we nearly made it. But yeah, I mean, it's really interesting because I think, people have spoken to who have done that, sort of carried on swimming through winter months, through the ice. And I know, I mean, I certainly look at the sort of photos and videos on social media and just go, well, it's really hard to even imagine how freezing that must be, how, that I guess almost the mental I don't know whether, not the mental struggle, but I guess the narrative that must be going on at the moment at which you're starting to approach sort of a freezing river.
Yeah, you do go, why am I
going.
doing this? Why am I doing this? I'm absolutely crazy. And then when you get in, you're sort of like, this is absolutely crazy. But afterwards, you get a rush. It's a rush of endorphins. And then, as you touched on in the intro, I've been also the last 2 years of COVID, I've also been unwell. And having a chronic health condition in normal times is pretty tough. Having it during a global pandemic is horrendous. And I still feel very lucky compared to so many others. And I'm always very aware of checking my privilege and my fortune, the good luck I have to have the support I do. But the cold water swimming also helped with that. The sort of, you have to, when you're unwell and have to do unpleasant appointments or unpleasant things to yourself, you have to steel yourself to do it. And it's similar to going in the cold water. And I think it built my mental fortitude of being able to say, I can do this, so I can also deal with the other stuff in my life, like teaching year 2 maths. So I'd rather go into a freezing lake than teach year 2 maths any day.
You know, I'm totally with you. And I think it's that thing of going as well, that, you know, what is it that we actually find the most challenging out of all of those things? Yeah, you know, small children and maths is, definitely high up there. And I think it's so interesting, because I think it's something we often talk about on this podcast as well. And certainly that idea that when you challenge yourself or take yourself outside of your comfort zone in one area of your life, and particularly in terms of sort of physical adventure or, activities, then that has that, that creates a core of resilience effectively that you can then go to when you're in a place, when you're having to take on other challenges, like you said, in terms of your health, or, when you're facing those sort of really difficult situations. I mean, I was just wondering that, because we've started talking about it already around, the benefits that adventure can bring. I just wondered, what have been some of maybe the unexpected benefits that you've got from your adventures?
I was never very sporty at school. I was never picked for team sports. I never did anything actively chose. I mean, I remember going on walks with my dad, which I loved because it was one-to-one time. But my husband is ex-military, and he's all about adventures and physical and pushing himself to the limit. And his big belief is you get out of your comfort zone and then you grow as a person. And since meeting him when I was 25, I've learned a lot from him and had learned to ski when I was born with a club foot, so skiing hurts, but I can do it now, and I'm pushed on through. And I think the unexpected thing but in particular the adventures in recent years, which have all been about getting myself outside as much as possible, going on really long walks in the fresh air. But how we survived the pandemic months, really, most people we went to get our bit of sodding fresh air every day, but I found it really helped. But I think mostly physically I've got stronger, and that means my health, although it's not improved, I think I can cope with it a lot better. And also it's inspired my writing in a way that I've been a journalist for 20 years. I've reported from war zones. I've written about posh spices, favorite cupcakes. I've interviewed the Home Secretary. I've done everything. I always say I'll write anything for anyone if you'll pay me and I'm interested. But I hadn't really written poetry before, and the cold water swimming and lockdown combined seemed to bring out this creative side in me. I mean, my mum will say you wrote poems when you were a kid, but I mean, as an adult, I would never have dared to put poet on my Instagram profile, and I put it on and I took it off, and then I put it on and I took it off, and I've now put it back on because I've had 2 poems now used by 2 different charities as for a fundraising campaign. So that's official, isn't it? I kind of feel I can now call myself that. Yes. But yes, the creative side of the misery of lockdown and ill health, and the joy of physical. So when I go on a long walk or a swim or a paddleboard, my brain, it seems to be the only time I get creative thoughts, rather than just, have I sorted out the kids this? Have I done that? Have I rang my doctor? Have I booked in with my nurse? The minutiae, the dull minutiae of everyday life goes away, and suddenly I find poetry and stories and ideas come to me.
It's amazing. So it's almost like it creates that that space for, yeah, where it's really, like you said, it's so difficult to find in and around the busyness of everything else. And it's really interesting because my next question was going to be to you around creativity. So it's almost like now I've run out of questions. But no, I think that, I was just wondering as well about, because, when your poems are quite political with a small p, they're about subjects that it comes across as something that you are passionate or you are angry or you have a strong emotion contained around it. And I guess I was just wondering whether that is something, because I think, certainly I experience this. If I do put anything out there that feels like something that people are going to comment on, rather than, like you say, Posh Spice's cupcakes, or, this is me having a nice swim. There are different things that you can put out in, I guess, in the world and on social media. And some of them feel safer. And certainly, this is something I experienced. Some feel safer and you think, oh, you'll get nice comments on them. And other things you feel, actually, this may be challenging to people. And I just wondered, with that aspect of your poetry, whether there's, whether you've felt that confidence has grown to use those subjects, or whether it's just that actually that is what you want to write about.
I would say I'm not very tough. I hate conflict. I hate arguing with people. So my big rule on subjects I feel passionately about, like Brexit, or I mean, there are lots. I've just made a ban that I don't talk to certain people about it. So my mother voted for Brexit. I didn't. We've written about it. She's also a writer. We've argued about it on the page, but we've agreed to never speak about it in person. I've written for the Daily Mail, so you can imagine the online comments there are brutal. And I made a policy to just never look at them because I found it really upsetting. But bizarrely, this week is the first time, or over the weekend, I just did a statement about Sarah Everard's death and the terrible handling, in my view, for the senior members of the police and the victim blaming. And I just shared it and then wrote my view on it, and it got sort of over 1,800 likes, which I've never experienced, and debating it. And then off the back of that, I wrote a really angry poem about misogyny called "I Built a Fire for My Rage," about how women are constantly told how to protect ourselves, but men are never taught how not to just hurt and brutalize women, in my opinion. And I put the poem out there, and then for the first time ever, I got some trolls on it, and people were arguing in it. And part of me was like, oh, I just want to delete their comments. This one, I was like, no, I'm going to leave it and just not get involved and just be very polite and respectful back. I was less respectful to the Mail, who basically said it was Sarah Everard's fault. So I just laughed at him and almost took amusement in his complete idiocy. But there were a couple of women arguing, and I just was like, oh, this makes me uncomfortable. But I leaned into it and let it stay there. And that was a step forward for me. But I think, yes, if you're when you put yourself out there creatively, I mean, when I wrote a book a decade ago about the lives of army wives, there were loads of lovely reviews on Amazon, but of course the two I remember were the bad ones. We always believe we always believe the messaging that reinforces our inner critic. But I think I'm working really hard at ignoring my inner critic and just going for it.
Yeah, no, I think that point about, I suppose, being out of your comfort zone in other areas as well, that thing of when you, like you say, when you expose something and you feel really strongly about it and you put it out there, and how that does attract criticism, and it does attract all sorts of, some of which is, more reasoned and some of which is just outrageous. And how you, like you said, if you're somebody who's naturally, and I can totally relate to that sort of conflict, wanting to avoid conflicts, partly about social conditioning and partly about, actually, I want to get on with people, and this is not the sort of thing I want to be taking up my energy with. Actually, I can imagine that's a really difficult balance. But like you said, the more you do it in a way, the more comfortable maybe you get.
I find I lose my words in a conversation. So if something comes up, I want to debate it, I find then I get really frustrated that I can't find the words to articulate myself. But I can do that on the paper because I can relook at it and I can get it all written down, and then that gives me the confidence. So, but I'm making a concerted effort to lean in more to arguments where, I feel about being actively anti-racist. So calling out racism when I see it, even if it is my beloved 97-year-old grandmother, who it's just an age thing, but explaining to her why it's not right. or explaining to my wonderful husband why he is a feminist and he has to call himself that. And he now does. He was in the army. He couldn't be in a more male environment, but he is being willing to learn and also listen to other people's views, because lots of very intelligent people I know voted for Brexit, and I still don't understand it, and I still can't believe they believe it's a good idea. But learning that, I feel in this internet age, we're all very busy shouting at each other, and it's very noisy, and you've lost the nuance. And we didn't used to behave like that. And I try and go by that. If I wouldn't say it to their face at a dinner party, I shouldn't write it down. But I grew up in a family where the political debate was completely the norm at the table, and my parents were friends with politicians from different parties who would be at the dinner table and could all coexist and discuss ideas and sort of learn from one another as differences. Whereas I feel one of the bad things about the internet now is you've either got to be on one side or the other. You've got to pick a team, and if you dare to not quite, you're a bad feminist if you're not doing all of it 100% right, and you're not all the issues. I feel like we've lost some of the nuance and the ability to learn from each other and listen to each other.
No, that's such a good point. And like you said, how it becomes so polarized so quickly that it's just, it becomes a shouting match across a divide rather than a conversation that you can learn from. I'm just wondering about this point about, comfort zones and the connection between taking yourself out of your comfort zone in one area and whether that has an impact then in another area of your life, whether that it's because something I often talk about, particularly with clients, is around this sort of practice of the more you do it, the more it becomes, you realize you can sort of manage it and you can cope with it, and actually you start to actively enjoy that feeling of, I suppose, expanding your horizons, your boundaries, and learning that sort of thing. And I just wondered whether that you felt that there were any parallels between, maybe the activities you've done and the sort of the other aspects of you expanding that comfort zone too.
Well, they say with the cold water thing, one of the advice is to start with cold showers. And then if you can have a cold shower every morning and you've done that one slightly unpleasant thing, that sets you up for the day because you've done something hard already. My husband always says you should always make your bed in the morning because it's just one active little piece of self-care that is done. And he sometimes passive aggressively only makes his side of the bed to make the point that I need to make my side. He's completely right. And all those little things, I think, completely, if I know I can walk into a freezing lake, well, I can face other scary aspects of life. And like the paddleboarding, we got a paddleboard 4 years ago. I always say before it was cool, before everyone was doing it. And it hurt my bad leg. So club foot, I've got a slightly raised heel. If you put it flat down for any length of time, it hurts. But so I started off with 5 minutes, then it was 10 minutes. Now I can go for 2 hours. And I'm not embarrassed to have to go down to my knees for a bit. But yes, it's perseverance. I didn't used to have that. So I would just say, my health's not great, I can't do that. But I was always quite stubborn professionally and wanted to push myself. But now I've pushed myself physically and realized what I can do. I think I'm going to lean in more in terms of pushing myself professionally as well.
So this creates that sort of circular effect almost, that it goes into different aspects. So if anybody's listening to this and they're thinking, either I'd love to get started with wild swimming or paddleboarding or any of those sort of activities, or actually I feel like maybe I'm staying too comfortable, maybe I need to find a way to start challenging that comfort zone a little bit and test to see what I'm capable of, what else is out there. I mean, what's the one piece of advice you'd give them?
Oh God, well, saying just to do it is a bit simplistic, but someone once said to me, which I loved, when I was trying to get into running, I'd been on a 5K and it was basically not much faster than a walk. And she just messaged me and said, it was on, I think Strava, she'd seen it, she said, and I put really slow run, embarrassing. And she just messaged me going, you're still faster than everyone sat on the couch. And I liked that idea. And it's like, actually, I don't mind being bad at something. I don't mind failing. I don't mind looking like an idiot. I just do it. And some of my poems, in my head, I go, they're cringe, they're bad because they're just rhyming, they're silly rhymes. But my silly little poems, I just did quotation marks, so this is because you guys got here. So what I was calling my silly little poems all my friends said gave them huge comfort during lockdown, because it was about homeschooling, it was about dealing with the kids, it was about the guilt and the chaos and the stress. And then I felt a bit more confident to write a more, in quotes, serious poem. And I've only done about 2 of those I'm really proud of, but I'm going to keep building on that. So yes, you're fast. If you go for a run, you're walking faster than everyone else on the couch. And that can apply to any aspect of your life. Just start doing it and don't care. Try not to care how you look or how good you are or what other people think. Just do it.
Love it. And yeah, it slightly reminds me of that sort of point about identity and how we see ourselves as well. You know, at what point do you become a poet, or what point do you become a runner, or any of those other labels that we feel we, you know, somehow become attached to our identity? And is it, like you said, that, you know, the point at which you just walk out the door and put on your trainers or sit down and put pen to paper, that's the point at which you embark on that sort of, that part of your identity and that part of your exploration. But I think there's such a sort of a resistance societally or culturally to be able to go, actually, you know, we have to be good at something or we have to be seen by others to be good at something before we can ascribe that label
and
to
I
ourselves.
would say that I adhere to that because of my poet, not a poet. I'm a poet, not a poet. I signed
we've all been there, don't worry. Yeah.
But I signed up to do a poetry course, a night course, which I did do the City Lit, and I absolutely loved it. And I moved up to the next level, and then my health deteriorated, so I had to sort of cancel everything extra I was doing because I was just too busy trying to stay upright to be a parent. But I'm going to go back to that, because even though I've now been paid for some of my poetry and I get a good reaction to my poetry, you can always learn more. So I'm not too, in quotes, proud to do that. And I'd love to do a creative writing course. I think now my children are at the age where they don't need me as much. I can sort of flex my creative muscles more. And actually one of my cousins, a singer, she's very creative as well. And she said her best bit of advice, she said, don't be hard on yourself, because you don't really get your creative side back until your youngest starts school. And my youngest started school in the pandemic, so I'm giving myself another year.
just to make it that little bit harder, just in case you need it. Yeah.
I mean, when I thought teaching year 2 maths was hard, teaching reception phonics is on a whole new level. The boy that can't sit down. So we just didn't do it. We went outside. And also, God, the other key thing of why I do everything I do is my children have to see their mummy be quite poorly, but they also see the mummy that is the first person jumping in the sea, the one carrying the heavy paddleboard down to the river, the one putting on trainers to go for a run, even if it's slow. And when we were in proper lockdown, my husband and I would do little workouts where one of us would stay on the mat in the sitting room, the other one would run around the block. And then my daughter decided she wanted to run around the block, and I loved that I'm setting her and them an example of just having a go and doing it, and you don't have to be brilliant, but that their mum is not just poorly or busy with work, but also someone that has adventures and takes them on adventures.
Yeah, that modeling in a way of how you want them to be, because it is, you know, and I think it's so tricky with kids as well, because we're also trying to facilitate their adventures so much of the time, and like you say, concentrate on whether it's the homeschooling and getting them out and all that side of things, and then actually them being part of an adventure that you are all taking together, and them seeing you in that light. I think it's so helpful for both sides in the end. So, I mean, Kitty, that's been absolutely amazing. I literally could keep talking for hours, but I'm conscious I do set myself a time limit occasionally on the show. So I was just wondering, if people want to find out more about you, about your incredible poetry, about, you know, your writing, where can they go?
Well, the best place at the moment is my Instagram, and just have a scroll and say hi. It's Kitty Dimbleby. It's just at Kitty Dimbleby. But I am building a website at the moment with the help of a very clever friend who's more techie than me. And that's going to have everything on it, from my journalism to my book to my poetry to this podcast, if I can link it up. So yes, that will exist, but that will be on my Instagram once it's ready.
Fantastic. And obviously we'll pop all those links in the show notes as well, so people can go straight away and access it. Thank you again for you taking the time to speak to me today. It's been an absolute pleasure. I'm so glad we managed to connect and do this. And I look forward to seeing how you go and where the poetry goes as well. I can't wait. Take care.
Thank you so much. It's been lovely.
An enormous thank you to Kitty for being my final guest on this season of the Everyday Adventure podcast. I cannot believe we're at the end of season 4. It feels like it was a minute ago that I was doing all the recordings and reaching out to people to be guests for this season. And suddenly here we are, end of November, and another season done. So first of all, a huge thank you to my wonderful guests. As always, I learn something and am inspired by every single conversation I have. And in the end, that's what keeps me doing this, the opportunity to learn and speak to these incredible people who are willing to put themselves out there and try something new, try something different, and then trust me enough to have a conversation about it too. So if you have been one of my guests this time or in any season of the podcast, thank you a million times. A huge thank you as well to my wonderful editor, Fran, who is the unsung hero in all of this. Fran Chirauskis, who some of you may have heard on the bonus episode we did this season, talking about her own podcast On the Outside. She also hosts the Seize Your Adventure podcast. Fran is an absolute legend. She puts up with a lot of very last minute requests and some quite late notice edits. And yeah, I just wanted to say thank you, Fran, for all you do. It is really appreciated and noticed. And yeah, it would be very hard to do this without you. And then my final thank you is to all of you for listening, whether you have been a long-time listener of this show, whether you have joined us recently, whether this is your first episode that you listen to. If it is, please do go back and check out some of the others. Like I said, every episode is different. Every episode covers a different angle around everyday adventure. And it's deliberately done so because I just feel that adventure covers such a huge range of activities, of ideas, of thoughts, of creativity. And my aim, as always with this podcast, has been to try and embrace and do justice to some of that. And I still feel, 4 seasons in, that I haven't even scratched the surface. Every time I think, that's covered quite a lot, someone else will pop up in my Instagram feed, or I'll be connected with another incredible person. And, that process starts all over again. But so thank you. If you are listening and supporting this show, I cannot tell you how much I appreciate it. This really is a passion of mine, and I am so grateful that you have decided to share it with me. If you have enjoyed the show, I would love it if you could leave me a review on Apple Podcasts or wherever you listen to your podcast. It makes a difference because it gives the opportunity to share the show with more people, and more importantly, share the stories that I am privileged enough to hear as part of the show. And if any of the themes or ideas have resonated with you, or if you've got any ideas for new guests or people you think I should absolutely have to speak to, again, I'd love you to reach out. You can find me on Instagram at Resilience at Work or Everyday Adventure Pod. You can find me on LinkedIn, Nicki Bass. You can get in touch with me via my website, which is resiliencwork.co.uk. So please just drop me an email. And yeah, I'd love to hear from you. Your thoughts and ideas and suggestions are always hugely appreciated. And you can sign up to get my newsletter as well, which I will be resurrecting. It's had a couple of months off. It all got a bit busy, but I will be resurrecting that come the new year. So if you want some tips on everyday adventures or find out when the next guests are coming, feel free to sign up for that too. Otherwise, I'm going to sign off now and say thank you again so much for listening, for participating. Have a wonderful Christmas and New Year. And I look forward to speaking to you again in 2022, when I'll be back with some more incredible everyday adventurers. Speak to you then. Take care. Bye.